The alien orphanage stood like a shadow on the edge of the city. Its walls were tall and gray, its gates heavy and cold. Inside those walls, children of many species lived, but they did not live in peace. They lived in fear. Every corner of the orphanage whispered with sadness. The dining hall was quiet except for the harsh laughter of bullies. The playground was empty because the weaker ones dared not play. In the sleeping halls, some cried softly at night, hoping no one would hear. The bullies always heard, and they loved the sound of fear. There were 5 of them, the strongest alien children in the orphanage. Each came from a warrior race, large and powerful. Their leader was a hulking creature with 4 arms and glowing red eyes. The others followed him like shadows, carrying out his cruelty. They stole food from smaller children, broke their toys, and mocked their voices. If anyone resisted, they were beaten until they could not stand. The caretakers were too few and too tired. They could not control the bullies, or perhaps they were afraid too, so the orphanage became a place ruled by fear. Not by rules, not by kindness, but by the fists and claws of the bullies. The weak aliens lived each day carefully. They walked fast and kept their heads down. They never spoke too loud, never laughed, never showed happiness, because happiness was dangerous. If the bullies saw someone smiling, they would destroy the reason for that smile. A drawing would be torn, a toy broken, a storybook burned. Everything good was taken away. One small alien with blue skin and bright eyes had once tried to resist. He had shouted at the bullies when they stole his meal. He was beaten so badly that he did not walk for days. After that, no one dared to fight. The orphans whispered in secret, but no one acted. They waited, they endured, but hope was gone then. One day, a rumor spread through the halls. A new orphan was coming. Children whispered about it during mealtime, their voices small. Who is it? What species? Maybe someone strong enough to stand up to them. But when the news came clear, their hopes faded. The new orphan was not a warrior alien, not even a large creature. He was a human boy. At first, no one believed it. Humans were rare in this part of the galaxy. Most aliens thought humans were weak, fragile, easy to break. Some laughed at the thought. A human, here he will not last a day, said one frightened child. Maybe he will be worse than us. Maybe he will draw more anger, another whispered. The bullies, when they heard, smiled with wicked joy. A new victim was coming, a human, small and defenseless. The days felt heavy as the children waited. The bullies grew more cruel, excited for their new toy. The weak aliens grew quieter, already feeling pity for the one who had not yet arrived. Even the caretakers prepared with little interest. To them, another orphan was only another burden. At night, in the sleeping halls, the whispers continued. Some prayed that the human would be strong. Others prayed that he would at least survive. But most did not believe in miracles anymore. Hope was too dangerous. On the morning of his arrival, the sky above the orphanage was dark with clouds. The gates opened slowly, groaning like old bones. A small transport ship landed on the rough ground. Its doors hissed open, and the children gathered in silence. The bullies stood at the front, smirking, waiting. The caretakers watched with tired eyes. The smaller orphans stayed behind, peeking from windows and corners. The first sight was of a thin figure stepping down from the ship. He was smaller than most of the aliens there. His hair was short, his clothes plain, his face calm. He looked like he carried no weapon, no armor, nothing at all. Only a small bag hung from his shoulder. The bullies laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the courtyard. This is the human. This is what they send to us. Weak and small, the leader growled. The others laughed harder, slapping their tails and stomping their feet. But the human boy did not flinch. He did not look away. He did not tremble. He looked at the orphanage walls, at the bullies, at the frightened children. And then he walked forward, his steps calm, his eyes steady. There was no fear in him, no panic, only a quiet strength that no one could understand. The orphans who watched felt something strange. They could not name it, but it was different from fear. It was something they had not felt in years, something dangerous, something almost forgotten. It was the first spark of hope. The bullies did not see it yet. The caretakers did not notice it. But the children who lived in shadows and whispers felt it deep inside. This human boy, small and strange, had brought something new through those gates, and though no one could say it aloud, they all felt the same question rising inside. Could he be the one to end the orphanage of fear? The human boy walked through the iron gates of the orphanage. The air around him felt heavy with silence. Dozens of alien eyes stared at him, some wide with curiosity, some filled with pity, and some burning with cruelty. He was smaller than many of the children. His body lean, his frame not built for battle. Yet the way he carried himself was different. His shoulders were straight, his eyes steady, his steps calm. The leader of the bullies pushed forward, his forearms flexing as he smirked. He towered over the boy, his shadow covering him like a dark storm. The bullies around him laughed loudly, already tasting victory. "Look at him," the leader growled. "So small, so weak, he will not survive the week." The laughter of the bullies shook the courtyard, but the human boy did not answer. He only looked up at the huge alien, and for a brief moment, there was silence. The silence made some of the weaker orphans shiver, because they had never seen anyone stand so calmly before the monsters of the orphanage. The caretakers gave him a bed in one of the cold sleeping halls. The bed was old, the sheets torn, the mattress thin. He placed his small bag down quietly. Other children watched from a distance, whispering to one another. Some felt sorry for him, believing he would be broken soon. Others kept their distance, afraid that being near him would bring them trouble. But one small alien child with blue skin, the same one who had once resisted and been beaten, looked at him carefully. He saw something in the human's eyes, something he did not understand yet. It was not fear, it was something else, something harder. When mealtime came, the boy entered the dining hall. The bullies were already there, sitting at the best table, eating the largest share of food. The smaller orphans sat at the edges, silent, eating scraps. The human took his tray of food and looked around. There was no space left except at the center, near the bullies. Everyone expected him to move quietly to the farthest corner, but instead, he walked straight to the center table. He placed his tray down calmly and sat. The hall froze, forks stopped moving, voices fell silent. The leader of the bullies rose to his feet, towering above, his red eyes glowing. "Are you lost, human?" he hissed. "This is our table." The other bullies laughed, slamming their fists on the wood, waiting for him to run. But the boy only raised his head and said in a calm voice, "I am not lost." The words were simple, yet they cut through the hall. Like a blade, the bully stared at him in disbelief. Then the leader snarled. With one massive arm, he shoved the boy's tray off the table, spilling the food across the floor. The hall filled with cruel laughter again. But the boy did not rise, did not shout, did not fight. He only looked at the food on the floor, then back at the bully, and slowly, very slowly, he smiled. That smile was strange, and it shook something inside the other orphans. It was not a smile of weakness nor of fear. It was a smile that said he was not broken, not even touched by their cruelty. The bullies grew angry. At the sight, the leader leaned close, his breath hot, his eyes burning. "You will regret that smile, human," he whispered. The boy did not move, his calm eyes reflecting the fire of the bullies' rage. Later that night, when the orphans returned to their sleeping halls, the whispers spread again. "Did you see it?" The human did not run. He sat at their table. He smiled at them. Some whispered with fear, thinking he was foolish. Others whispered with awe, as if something impossible had just happened. For so long, no one had dared even to look at the bullies. But this boy, on his first day, had sat before them as if they were nothing more than shadows. In the darkness of the hall, the blue-skinned child turned on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He could still see that smile in his mind. It was not the smile of someone weak. It was the smile of someone who had faced monsters before. He wondered where the boy came from, what he had seen. And deep inside, he began to feel something dangerous. Something he had not felt in years. He began to feel hope again. The bullies, however, were not pleased. In their corner of the sleeping hall, they planned their next move. "This human must be crushed," the leader growled. "He thinks he is strong. We will show him pain." The others agreed, their voices dark and cruel. They would test him soon. They would break him in front of everyone. But what they did not know was that the human boy was already watching them, already studying. His calm eyes were not just brave. They were sharp, every move, every weakness, every strength of the bullies he was already learning. And though the bullies thought they would break him, the boy was quietly preparing for something they could not imagine. The orphanage, for the first time in years, felt like it was waiting for something. The walls that had seen only fear now carried whispers of change. The air felt heavier, as if holding its breath. And though no one could say it aloud, every child felt it deep inside. The human had arrived, and nothing in the orphanage would ever be the same again. The next morning began like any other in the orphanage. The sun outside was weak, its light falling through the barred windows of the cold halls. The orphans moved quietly to the dining hall, their eyes down, their steps soft, but inside their hearts, whispers still lived about the strange human boy. He had sat at the bullies' table. He had not run, he had smiled. No one had ever done such a thing before. The bullies had not forgotten either. Their pride was wounded, their power challenged. They gathered in the corner, their eyes fixed on the human, their leader. The giant four-armed alien clenched his fists, his red eyes burning. "Today," he growled, "we show him who rules this place." The others nodded eagerly, their claws scratching the table, their tails swishing with excitement. When the human entered, carrying his tray with calm steps, the hall went silent again. He did not look at the bullies, he did not hurry. He simply walked with steady movements, as if he feared nothing. The orphans watched with wide eyes, their breath caught in their throats. They knew what was coming. The bullies were ready, and the human was walking into danger. The leader stood, towering like a dark mountain. He moved in front of the human, blocking his path with one powerful arm. He shoved the boy's tray hard. The food crashed to the floor, spilling across the stones. The hall filled with cruel laughter, echoing off the walls. The bullies slapped the tables, shouting, "Weak human, bend, crawl, beg," but the boy did not bend. He looked down at the food on the floor, then raised his head slowly. His calm eyes met the leader's burning ones, and again, that strange quiet smile appeared on his face. The bullies froze for a heartbeat, their laughter faltering. There was something about that smile, as if the boy saw through them, as if their power meant nothing to him. The leader's rage boiled. He swung his massive arm, aiming to knock the human down. Gasps filled the room. Children covered their mouths, waiting for the boy to fall. But the boy stepped aside with quick, precise movement. The giant's arm cut through empty air. The leader stumbled slightly, surprised. The bullies blinked, confused. The human boy had not blocked, had not attacked, but he had not been hit either. The leader roared, swinging again with another arm, then another, but each time, the boy slipped away like water flowing around stone. He moved fast but not wild, every step calculated, every dodge clean. The orphan's eyes widened. Whispers spread. He is not fighting them, he is dancing. He is too fast. He is not weak. The leader grew angrier with each miss. His huge fists slammed against tables, against walls, but never against the human. The other bullies joined, claws and tails striking. But the boy twisted and ducked. He moved under arms, around legs, slipping through gaps like a shadow. Not once did he strike back, yet not once did they touch him. Finally, the leader lunged with all four arms at once. The boy bent low, slid across the floor. and grabbed a fallen cup with a swift motion. He flicked it at the leader's eyes. The alien roared in pain as water splashed into his glowing vision. For a brief moment, the giant stumbled blindly, his claws swiping at nothing. The boy rose calmly, stepping back as the leader staggered. The hall went silent, the sound of the bully's rage replaced by the shock of every orphan watching. The human boy still had not struck them, still had not shouted. He had simply avoided every blow, every attack, and then used the smallest trick to make the strongest stumble. It was not brute strength, it was something else. It was control. It was intelligence. It was courage. The leader wiped his eyes, his chest heaving with fury. He looked at the boy with pure hatred, but also something new, something he had never felt before. It was doubt, for the first time. The bullies felt that maybe this small human was not easy prey. Maybe he was something dangerous. The boy bent down quietly, picked up his tray from the floor, and walked to an empty corner. He sat calmly and began to eat as if nothing had happened. The bullies stared at him, trembling with rage, but they did not move. They had failed to touch him, and everyone had seen it. The orphans whispered louder. This time, their eyes shining. He did not fight them, but he won. He made the leader stumble. No one has ever done that before. For the first time in years, the hall was filled not with fear, but with hope that night. The bullies sat in the dark, plotting. He must be crushed. He is making them brave. The leader hissed. The others agreed, their voices sharp with anger, but deep inside, doubt gnawed at them. They had struck with all their strength, yet he had slipped through their grasp like smoke. And the smile on his face haunted them, a smile that said he was not afraid. Not now, not ever. Meanwhile, in the sleeping hall, the smaller orphans whispered in excitement. Some dared to smile, others dared to dream. The blue-skinned child whispered softly to a friend, "He is different. He is not like us. He is teaching us something." And though no one dared to say the word, everyone was thinking it. The human had shown them that the bullies were not unbeatable. For the first time, the walls of fear had begun to crack. The days passed, but the memory of the first clash stayed alive in every corner of the orphanage. The smaller children whispered about the human boy, replaying in their minds how he had slipped through the giant bully's arms, how he had moved with speed and calmness, how he had never once fallen. The bullies, however, burned with anger, their pride wounded, their power questioned. They could not allow the orphans to think the human was strong. They had to crush him, show everyone that resistance was useless. One evening, as the moons rose over the orphanage, the bullies prepared their ambush. The leader growled to his gang, his red eyes glowing in the dim light. "Tonight we corner him. No tricks, no games. We break him until he begs." The others snarled in agreement, their claws tapping against the stone floor. They had chosen the sleeping halls, where the lights were low, where no caretaker would interfere. The human boy lay quietly on his bed, his eyes closed, but he was not asleep. He had noticed the bullies watching him for days, whispering in dark corners. He knew this moment would come. He knew they would not forgive what happened in the dining hall. He listened carefully, hearing the heavy steps approach, the low growls in the corridor, when the door creaked open, and shadows filled the hall. The boy opened his eyes, calm as ever. The leader stepped forward, his forearms spread wide, blocking the light from the door. Behind him stood the others, their sharp teeth grinning. The smaller orphans froze in their beds, their bodies stiff with fear. They wanted to scream for help, but they knew no one would come. The human sat up slowly, meeting the leader's gaze without fear. "You think you are clever," the leader hissed, "but tonight you will learn who rules this place." The bullies closed in, surrounding the human's bed. One tried to grab him, but the boy slipped away, rolling across the floor with quick precision. Another swung a heavy tail, but the boy ducked, the tail smashing the frame of the bed into splinters. The orphans gasped, their hearts racing, their eyes wide. The human moved like water, flowing between their strikes. He did not fight with strength, but with speed and timing. Every time they lunged, he was already gone. Every time they swung, they hit only air or stone. The leader roared, growing more furious. "You cannot run forever, human," he snarled. But the boy only smiled that quiet smile, the one that made the orphans feel something new, something like courage at last. The leader charged, all four arms reaching to trap him. The boy stepped back against the wall, waiting until the last moment. Then, with sudden movement, he kicked the leg of a broken bed frame. The wood splinter snapped loose and rolled under the leader's heavy foot. The giant slipped, his massive body crashing into the wall with a thunderous sound. Dust rained from the ceiling as the room shook. The smaller bullies froze, their eyes wide in disbelief. The human had not struck the leader with fists or claws. He had used his mind, his speed, his awareness. It was not brute strength that defeated the leader. It was cleverness. The other orphans watched in silence, their hearts pounding. They had never seen the bullies humiliated like this, never seen them stumble. The leader rose with rage, his face twisted with fury. He lunged again, his claws slashing wildly, but the human ducked low and slid beneath his arms. In one swift motion, he snatched a blanket from the bed and threw it over the giant's head. Blinded, the leader staggered, roaring with anger. The boy stepped aside calmly, letting the giant stumble and crash into one of his own gang members. Two bullies fell in a heap, tangled together, their pride crushed. The hall erupted in whispers, the orphan's fear cracking into awe. "He is not afraid," one whispered. "He made them fall," another gasped. The blue-skinned child clutched the edge of his blanket, his bright eyes glowing with new light. For the first time he believed the bullies could be defeated. The remaining bullies pulled the blanket away from their leader and dragged him back. His face burned with humiliation, his chest heaving with fury. "Not here," he growled, his voice shaking with rage. "But soon, human, soon you will break." They left the hall in anger, their heavy steps shaking the floor. But their threats sounded weaker now, less certain. For all their power, for all their size, they had failed again. The human boy returned to his bed, calm as ever. He lay down, closed his eyes, and rested. The smaller orphans stared at him in silence, their hearts racing, their thoughts alive. They wanted to ask him how he had done it, why he did not fear. But none dared speak, not yet. Still, as the night grew quiet, their fear began to fade. In its place, something else grew, something dangerous. It was hope. The blue-skinned child finally whispered into the darkness, his voice trembling. "He is not weak. He is teaching us. He is showing us how to stand." Others nodded softly in their beds, their small faces glowing in the dim moonlight. And though the bullies believed they would strike again and win, the orphans already knew the truth. The human boy had something greater than strength. He had hidden power, the kind that could not be broken, and soon, the orphanage would change forever. The orphanage was not the same after that night. The clash in the sleeping hall spread like fire through whispers and secret talks. Every child repeated the story of how the human boy had made the bully stumble, how he had used nothing but speed and cleverness to humiliate them. For years the bullies had been untouchable, their power unquestioned, their control absolute. But now, one small human had cracked that wall of fear. The bullies still walked with pride, their eyes glowing with anger, their voices loud. But the orphans no longer bowed their heads as quickly. They still feared, but hidden beneath that fear was a spark the bullies could not crush. It was the spark of hope. The human boy kept to himself at first. He ate quietly, walked calmly, and spoke little. But the orphans began to watch him closely. They noticed the way he moved, how his steps were steady, how his eyes never darted nervously like theirs. Studied everything, the cracks in the walls, the paths in the courtyard, the habits of the bullies. He was always learning, always planning. One evening, after the caretakers left the hall, a small group of children gathered near his bed. The blue-skinned child was the first to whisper, "How do you do it? How are you not afraid?" The boy opened his eyes, calm and sharp. "I am afraid," he said softly, "but fear is not chains. Fear can be broken if you stand against it." The children listened in silence, their hearts pounding. No one had ever spoken to them like this before. The next day, in the courtyard, when the bullies were not watching, the human began to show them simple moves. "Do not fight with strength. You do not have," he explained, his voice low. "Fight with your mind. Fight with speed. Fight with unity." He showed them how to dodge a swing, how to step aside at the right moment, how to push when balance was weak. The small aliens copied his movements, laughing quietly when they succeeded. For the first time in years, the courtyard held laughter. Word spread, and more orphans joined. At night, in the sleeping hall, he taught them how to work together. 2 children against 1 bully, 3 moving as one. He showed them how even the weakest could resist if they supported one another. It was not about winning every fight. It was about standing without fear. The bullies noticed the change. They saw the whispers, the small smiles, the sparks in the eyes of those they once crushed. It made their rage burn hotter. "We will strike soon," the leader snarled, "before this fire spreads too far." But even as they planned, the fire was already growing beyond their reach. One night, the human gathered the children in the dark hall, his calm voice steady. "You think they are strong because they are bigger, but strength alone does not rule. They rule because you let them. They rule because you believe you are weak." The children listened, their eyes wide, their hearts racing. "But if you stand together, if you face them side by side, they will fall," he continued. His words were not loud, but they struck deeper than any shout. Every child who heard him felt a weight lift from their chest. They were not alone anymore. The blue-skinned child spoke, his voice trembling but brave. "I thought I was weak. I thought we could never fight them, but you showed us we can." The boy looked at him and nodded. "You were never weak. You only forgot your strength," he replied. The hall fell silent, and in that silence, something powerful was born. Not just hope, but unity. The next day, the bullies tried to take food from a smaller alien at the dining table. For the first time, the child did not give it away. He held it tight. And when the bully shoved him, 2 more children stood beside him. The bullies snarled, ready to strike. But when they looked around, they saw more eyes watching, more children ready. The orphanage had changed, the fear was cracking, and the human boy sat quietly in the corner, his calm eyes watching everything. At night, the orphans whispered not of fear, but of plans. What if we all stood together in the courtyard? What if we did not hide anymore? What if we ended this? The bullies had ruled with terror for so long, but now their grip was slipping. The orphans had tasted something new, and they could not let it go. The bullies roared louder, struck harder, tried to break the spirit that was rising. But every cruel act only made the children more united. Every shove, every stolen meal, every insult became fuel for their growing fire. And at the heart of it all was the human boy. He had not fought with fists, but he had given them something greater. He had given them courage. The blue-skinned child lay in bed one night, his heart full of energy. He whispered softly to his friends, "Tomorrow we show them, tomorrow we stand." And though the bullies still prowled the halls like monsters, the orphanage no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the children who had found their strength. It belonged to the spark that the human had lit. And deep in the shadows, the bullies sensed it too. Their power was slipping, their rule was crumbling. They could still strike, they could still hurt, but they could no longer control the human boy. Had changed everything, and soon the storm would come. The air in the orphanage grew heavy with tension. The bullies could feel the change. They saw the way the smaller children stood taller, the way whispers carried strength instead of fear. Their leader growled each night, his red eyes glowing hotter, his voice a storm. "The human is poisoning them. He must be destroyed." He snarled, his gang nodded, their claws scraping against the walls, their rage burning. They planned one final strike, one violent show of power that would crush. A spark of rebellion once and for all. But the orphans were no longer the same. The human boy had given them more than courage. He had given them a plan. He had shown them how to move together, how to watch each other's backs, how to turn fear into strength. And though their hands still trembled, their hearts no longer bowed, they waited for the moment when the bullies would come. That moment came in the courtyard, under the pale light of 2 moons. The bullies stormed in, their leader roaring, his forearms flexing. The orphans were gathered in small groups, talking in hushed voices. But when the bullies arrived, none scattered. None ran to hide. Instead, they stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes locked on their tormentors. The leader smirked, his voice dripping with cruelty. "You dare defy us? You dare stand when we tell you to kneel?" His laughter echoed across the stones, joined by the snarls of his gang. But the sound did not shake the children. This time, they did not bend, they did not look away. And at the front of the group stood the human boy, his calm eyes fixed on the towering figure before him. The leader lunged first, his massive fist swinging like a hammer. But before it could land, 3 small aliens moved as one, pushing the human aside and striking at the leader's legs. The giant stumbled, his roar of rage filling the courtyard. Another bully charged, but 2 more children grabbed his tail, pulling him off balance. The fight had begun, not as one against many, but as many against few. The courtyard erupted with chaos. The bullies swung and clawed, their power shaking the ground. But the children moved in unison, just as the human had taught them. They ducked, they dodged, they pulled together. A small child tripped one bully while another pushed him down. A group of 3 distracted the second in command, striking from all sides. The bullies were strong, but strength alone could not crush unity. The leader roared again, his arms flailing, his eyes glowing brighter with rage. He charged at the human boy, determined to end him. But this time, the boy did not slip away. He stood his ground until the last moment, then sidestepped, his foot hooking behind the giant's leg. The leader stumbled forward, crashing into the stone fountain at the center of the courtyard. Water splashed everywhere, soaking the ground, soaking the bullies' pride. The orphans cheered, their voices rising like thunder. For the first time, their fear had turned into battle cries. The bullies tried to strike harder, but the sound of united voices shook them. Everywhere they turned, children resisted, small hands pulling, small feet striking, small hearts refusing to break. The power of the bullies was crumbling before their eyes. The leader rose from the fountain, his body dripping with water, his roar shaking the walls. He swung wildly at the human boy, his fury unstoppable. But the boy was faster, sharper, and calmer. He moved aside again, and this time the blue-skinned child leapt forward, striking the leader with a sharp push to the chest. The bully stumbled backward once more, his red eyes wide with shock. The orphans gasped, then cheered louder. One of their own had struck the monster, and the monster had fallen back. The fight stretched on, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The bullies grew tired, their strikes heavy and clumsy. The children, though smaller, were many, and for every child the bullies knocked down, 2 more rose to take their place. The courtyard became a storm of rebellion, of courage, of voices shouting together. "No more, no more," they cried. Their voices rose so high that even the caretakers came running. But when they saw what was happening, they did not interfere. They stood at the edges, silent, watching as the balance of power shifted before their eyes. At last the leader fell to his knees, his chest heaving, his eyes burning with disbelief. The human boy stood before him, calm and steady, his voice quiet. "You ruled by fear, but fear does not last. Today it ends." The courtyard grew silent, every child holding their breath. The leader tried to rise again, but the strength was gone, his pride shattered, his gang broken. The orphans surrounded him, Not with fear, but with courage, and for the first time. The bullies bowed their heads. The courtyard exploded with cheers. Children hugged each other, laughed and cried. Their chains of fear had been broken, their spirits free. The human boy did not cheer. He only stood quietly, watching the others. Celebrate, his calm smile returned, not for himself, but for them. They had fought, they had stood, and they had won. That night, the orphanage was alive with light. The children whispered not of pain, but of freedom. They dreamed not of hiding, but of living, and though the bullies still remained, their power was gone. The great rebellion had ended their rule, and in the center of it all stood the human boy, the spark that had turned whispers into fire. The orphanage was not the same after the rebellion. The courtyard that had once echoed with cruel laughter was now filled with the voices of children talking, laughing, and even singing. For the first time in years, the walls no longer carried the sound of fear. Instead, they carried the sound of life. The bullies, once untouchable, now walked with lowered heads. Their pride was broken, their control shattered. They were no longer rulers. They were only orphans like the rest. The human boy had not celebrated loudly that night. He had stood quietly in the corner, watching the others smile, but inside he felt the warmth of victory. Not for himself, but for them. He had come into a place ruled by shadows and had lit a spark. And now that spark had become a fire that no bully could ever extinguish again. The smaller orphans gathered around him often. They asked him questions. They followed his steps. "Teach us more," they whispered. "Show us how to be strong." The boy agreed, not with pride, but with calm patience. He showed them exercises to build speed, games that sharpened the mind, and tricks to defend against larger foes. But most of all, he taught them to stand together. "Alone we can fall, but together we are stronger than any giant," he said. The children listened, their hearts full of courage. The blue-skinned child became his closest follower. He walked at the human's side, repeating his words to the younger ones. He had once been beaten into silence, but now his voice was strong. He believed in the human, but more importantly, he believed in himself. He believed that every child in the orphanage could be more than a victim. The bullies sat apart, their eyes still full of anger. But something had changed inside them too. Without fear to feed on, their power had no ground. The children no longer bowed when they passed, no longer cried when they threatened. Some bullies tried to lash out, but they were met with united resistance. Every time they struck, 10 voices shouted back, 10 hands stood firm, slowly, even. The bullies began to change. They were no longer feared monsters. They were simply broken children, and in time, even they started to listen to the lessons the human boy gave. The caretakers, who had once turned away in silence, now looked with new eyes. They saw the change. They saw the unity. For the first time, they felt hope too. They began to support the children, fixing broken toys, helping in training, bringing more food to share. The orphanage was no longer a prison of fear. It was becoming a home. One evening, the human stood in the courtyard with all the children gathered around. The 2 moons shone above, their light soft and silver. He looked at the faces before him, faces that had once been pale with terror, now glowing with courage. "You fought because you chose not to fear," he said, his voice steady. "You stood because you remembered that you are not alone. This is your strength. Never forget it." The children listened, their eyes shining, their hearts pounding. They knew his words were true. The blue-skinned child raised his hand and spoke, his voice full of emotion. "You came here alone, human, and you changed everything. You gave us freedom. You gave us hope." The boy looked at him and shook his head gently. "I did not give it. You already had it. I only showed you. It was there." The children grew silent, the words sinking deep into their souls. They understood now. They were not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply forgotten. The days grew brighter in the orphanage. Children played without fear. They shared food without hiding. They told stories without whispering. The bullies no longer stole or mocked. Some even joined in the games, their rough edges slowly softening. The walls of the orphanage still stood tall and gray. But inside, life had color again. The human boy remained calm and quiet, never boasting, never claiming to be a hero. But to every child in that place, he was more than just another orphan. He was a symbol, a reminder that even in the darkest place, one spark of courage could light the way. He was proof that humanity carried something powerful, something that could not be measured by size or strength. It was the strength of will, the strength of unity, the strength of refusing to bend. At night, when the courtyard grew still and the children slept peacefully, the boy sometimes sat alone. He looked up at the stars, his eyes steady, his thoughts silent. No one knew what he dreamed of or what his past had been, but everyone knew one truth. Because of him, the orphanage was no longer ruled by fear. Because of him, they had found a new beginning. And so the story of the human boy spread, whispered in every corner, carried in every heart. It was a story not just of survival, but of defiance, of courage, of hope. The children would never forget that once, in an alien orphanage ruled by bullies, a single human arrived, and with nothing but calm eyes and unshakable will, he changed everything forever.